Good morning. Very welcome to you all who are joining us today. Zoe and I are really chuffed that you're here. So we're just going to do very quick intros and then we are going to dive into this really interesting conversation of leading change. Leading change is really bloody hard, always, quite honestly. And yes, you can make it easier and you can take some of the pain out of it, but there is no doubt it is not the easiest thing to do as a leader or as an HR pro. So we are going to kind of talk about some of that with you today. So Zoe, do you want to do a quick intro?
Yeah, of course. Good morning, everyone. Gosh, it really feels like a morning. I don't even know what day we're on at the minute. Tuesday, I think.
Yep.
That's what happens when you're so busy, isn't it? But that's good. It's a good thing. So good morning, everyone. My name's Zoe Poulton. You might have seen some of the lives that Amber and I have done already. This is our fourth one in this series, the final one in this series, but we will be coming to you with more general chats about leadership and change and a few other bits and pieces. So I have been working in the area of change for more years than I think I can count. I definitely can't count on my hands, put it that way. I now work with organizations and individuals, and I teach change management. So I actually teach people how to lead through change. For individuals, that usually looks like my certified change manager program, my CPD accredited course. But for organizations, it's slightly different because obviously there are lots of moving parts, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, during this chat, because you get change is all about people. And when you've got hundreds and potentially thousands of people in an organization, everyone is going to view change differently. So with organizations, I work across all the levels and I look at the change leader, the change manager, and also the change agent, so that all the training is working in harmony so people know what they're doing and they know what to expect from each other as well. So that is what I do. That's why we're having this chat today, because what we do really complements each other really well.
Shall I pick up from there then in terms of kind of me and my background? So my name's Anna Botois. I'm a leadership success coach, and my prior to that was as a HR professional. So I've worked in HR teams for 20 years, some of that leading HR departments as well. And you're dealing with change all the time in one way, shape, or form. And that's what's so interesting, I think, about this topic. So I work with leaders now rather than working in the HR field. My business is Purpose Guide Consulting. And I help people as they move into bigger roles. That's where I focus my time, and change is a huge focus of that kind of work because that's what we're dealing with, whether you're changing as an individual or you're implementing change as a result of joining teams or just the day-to-day stuff that goes on. So if we start on that kind of topic of organizational change, Zoe, what do you see some of the biggest factors and impacts within organizational change?
I think the biggest blocker or challenge to change that people always come up against is resistance. I won't say pure and simple resistance, but that can look and sound so different. So it can be audible happiness, where people actually, and you know when you hear it, because it's a one-way conversation, people aren't talking to you, they're talking at you. Or you'll hear the rumor mill starting, or those conversations around the water cooler or the kitchen that go very quiet when you turn up, those kind of conversations, but people are unhappy. So you might hear audible unhappiness. And I call it behavioral spread. What happens with audible unhappiness, that's a word, is that it kind of, do I want to use the word infects? I'm going to. It infects other people. So it spreads, and suddenly you get all these rumor mills, which is why when I teach change management, I talk about communication being forefront and making sure that you're getting information out there. Even if you don't know everything that's going on about the change, tell people that and say, look, this is what we know and this is what we don't know. So the rumors don't start. So definitely audible unhappiness. Disengagement's another one, which can be really hard to spot straight away. But it's things like, I'll tell you why it's hard to spot, because it could be things like not talking up in meetings. But as you and I know, not everyone does talk up in meetings. So it's just almost one of the signs. Another thing about disengagement is you can see the opposite, where people just agree to everything. So actually that's a form of disengagement, even though they're being verbal about it, because they don't care. They're just like, oh, I'm fed up. I'm fatigued with all this. And then the third thing I see with resistance is sabotage, which is you don't see it very often. But let's just say if you are testing equipment, new equipment, and something keeps breaking all the time with the same person, you might want to look into that. And there's a way to do it, of course.
Of course it's. But I do think you get behavioural sabotage, and I think that part is such an interesting one on a organisational level. And I think the bit that you picked up on around change fatigue, we did one of these sessions on change fatigue. So if that's worth going back and having a look at, if this is something that you're particularly concerned about. But I've worked in organizations where the pace and the level and, you know, the volume of change becomes too overwhelming for people. And that's where that behavioral sabotage, I think, can kick in quite a lot, especially where you've maybe got leadership teams who have got competing change agendas that they are driving and leading within the organization. And I think that I think is a really important area for organizations to take note of around their change plan and around what is going on in their organization. And some of the biggest issues I've seen is where there's just too much. And actually, you know, we don't even then consider something that's a change, that's a process change. That is still change. That is impacting somebody's day, somebody's experience, something somewhere. But because we're going, well, we've got a lot of change, so we'll just focus on the really big ticket stuff. Well, actually, it might be the really small stuff that has the biggest impact in terms of your customer experience or something like that. And that, I think, is something organizations need to pay a lot more attention to. So, you know, when we're talking about easing the pain, think seriously about the amount of change and what you're labeling as change in your organizations, because that will really help you to have honest conversations around, are we just doing too much to people right now? Because your point is correct. You know, even when it's a new system or a new something, there are human beings involved in that. And if we forget that, we have missed the point of what we're doing leading our organizations.
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? And I'm going to go back to your point about fatigue, because I think it's really important. But first of all, I've seen so many job descriptions where they ask for change managers and they talk about project management, or they ask for project management and they say must be able to deal with change. And yes, they work together hand in glove, but change management and project management are two distinct, different skill sets. And I say that I'm qualified across both. So I'm very much saying that from a place of kind of knowing. The thing is about projects, they're very much looking at budget. They're looking at the time and they're looking at the quality. So it's the triangle of project management. Change, we are looking at people. That is what we are focused on. Yes, of course, we want things to come in on time, on budget and a good standard, but we are really focused on behaviors and people and emotions, because people are all about emotions. So we very much focus on that. And when we talk about change fatigue, I call it the hamster wheel of change. When in my programs, in my courses, when I talk about the difference between fatigue and resistance, I say, look, resistance is about one change. You're resisting a change. Fatigue is when you are just exhausted. And it could be, like you said, from too much change. But this is the interesting thing. And this is something I teach in the Certified Change Manager program, but also specifically in my Change Leader program, which is a one-day immersive course it's usually run in-house in organizations. We talk about organizational alignment, because fatigue occurs when change, like the hamster wheel of change, like I said, and usually what happens is a change will start and then there'll be a new flavor of the month, a focus, and the leaders potentially will go off onto a different focus. But this changes, carries on, and people get exhausted. So what we talk about in the leader program is actually, what's your organizational vision? What's your longer term vision, your values, your mission, all the business strategy stuff? And actually, how does that then relate to the changes that you're putting into place? Do you need to put all those changes in place? Is it the right time for some of them? So we do a lot of work on actually how you align that change to the organization and then how you communicate it. Because tell you what, Anwen, give your change managers a break. It's so hard to communicate the change, the why, when your leadership are going, oh, we've forgotten about that one, we're going on to the next one. So it's just all three courses that I do align with each other to make sure you've got that harmony. But it's such a big thing about that fatigue.
It's the biggest head plant into a wall moment, isn't it? When there isn't a clear explanation as to why something's happening.
Yeah.
And that, how do you expect people to kind of move through a place of going, I understand why you want me to go from point A to point B now. And I've understood why it aligns really nicely and importantly to the organization. You're not just asking me to do this because you fancied changing it. And
Yeah.
that's where that resistance really comes in, isn't it, around change of
Mm.
kind of like, you haven't given me a good reason to change my behavior or my actions
Yeah.
or anything like that. And that's an organizational problem. That is not the individual problem. And I think sometimes it's like, oh, why are these people not doing? Well, we've got to take a long, hard look at ourselves as to
Mm.
what, how are we messaging? How have we made it feel valuable and important to them to make that change? That's absolutely important.
Definitely. As humans, we are hardwired to resist change. I'm not going to go into it in this session because it will take an hour. But it's all about actually the energy that our brain is allowing or enabling or facilitating our body to use. And when we go through change, we learn new things. And as we're learning new things, it's taking a lot of energy. So it's a lot to do with, but like you said, it's all about how we message it and how we position the change to sort of circumvent or navigate that hard wiring of the brain. So yeah, definitely. But I think you were just about to go say, it's interesting to move on and actually think, what can we do? What can we do as leaders?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll pick up on that first then, if that's all right. So I think there's a couple of things that are really important, and we've talked about this already a little bit in terms of that organizational alignment bit. Before you start a change, a project, and making sure those come together really successfully, have a thought about where is organizational trust in our organization? Where are the relationships within our organization? Because as well planned out as your project and your change activity might be, if relationships are poor, if trust within the organization is poor, you're already fighting against something. So where you've got a really significant shift that you need to make in your organization, it might be worth delaying that shift actually, if you're able to, and working on the trust and relationship across the organization ahead of doing that. And that might feel weird in a way because you're like, sometimes the change is forced and you've got to do it. And it's yeah, of course. However, what you have to be really mindful of is the general success that you're going to have with that change, that activity, if relationships are poor and trust is low. So what do you think about that, Zoe?
Oh, it's huge, isn't it? It's huge because, and I think I'm just trying to think, oh God, I'm thinking which angles come out because there's so much to unpack from that, isn't there? So I always say with change management, it is usually the sort of middle management layer that get given the task of leading through change.
Yeah.
Okay, usually. And actually I work a lot with HR professionals because usually it's HR professionals that get given the task of leading through change. Because actually we're in the perfect position in that people side. We already understand people.
Yeah.
But that's the point. Do we understand our people well enough to know what they're going to need from us to support them through change? The anchor of change is really those people who are driving the change, but they are close to the people who it's happening to. So they are usually your change managers. They are usually your line managers, your middle management. And we talk about change managers working with line management really, really strongly. Because actually, if you're an external change manager or even an internal one from a different department, you are not going to know all those individuals. But your line managers will or should. So I think it's really important for line managers to get to know their people. And that can be from right at the beginning when you're onboarding people. I actually teach it in my change manager program, the 4-box grid, where you actually ask them 4 different areas. And one is, what are your ambitions? Second one is, what are your motivators? The third one is what your challenge is. I can't off the head and remember what the fourth one is, but it's all about getting to know actually what are your challenges? What do you think you're going to be challenged with? Imagine if you had that conversation at the beginning and they said, look, I get challenged when things change quickly, or I like to have a run up, and you straight away go, okay, so I know that I'm going to need to give you more information. Some people might say, actually, I thrive on change. Okay, interesting. But, I thrive on that quick decision making. Some people might say, listen, I'm motivated by an open and transparent workplace where I'm told everything, and even if it's not the good stuff. okay, so let me think and change sense. I can tell them when things are going wrong because maybe I can pick their brains. It's that there's loads, or we can use them as a change agent. There's loads of different ways to use the information, but you have to get to know your team, which builds that trust.
Yeah,
I think definitely.
absolutely. And I think, excuse me, so, I was talking about the organizational piece, but the individual leader and that middle management group for trust and relationship building for change is also, like you say, really, really critical in terms of anchoring what's going to happen. And listening is really key to that. Listening to what's going on and building on what you've said there around what you know about those people. I messed up on this quite significantly once in terms of not really listening. I was listening to respond rather than listen to really consider what that individual's perspective was on what was happening. And that was a real learning point for me in terms of, yes, it was important to get them on board, but by just talking loudly at them and kind of going, no, this is going to be the right thing to do, that isn't the way you get people on board. Where we need to be helping and easing the pain of change is helping leaders to have those skills when they go through change activities and understand the best ways to handle some of those things. And yes, they are critical to the change landing, but what we need to be able to do is help them go through that comfortably, confidently. Listening is a core part of that. And actually, it buys you time. If you really genuinely listen to kind of consider the situation, it's buying you time to then consider what that means for you as a leader and what that's meaning for your team. You might have missed something. You might have not thought about something. And that opportunity to listen to consider rather than listen to respond will pay off big time. So I think that is a real opportunity that you've got for easing the change pain within your teams, is helping your leaders to really be able to listen well when colleagues are kind of got thoughts or got concerns around change activity.
Yeah, I think it's that listening to understand piece, isn't it? Like you said, consideration, actually listening to understand their perspectives. Because quite often in change, and actually as leaders in any situation, we usually have an agenda. We have an agenda that we have to push forward. But it's remembering that we're speaking to another human being. And yes, we may have the agenda we need to push, but you're speaking human being, and understanding what their fears are, what their aspirations are, what they want from life in general means that actually it's going to make it a lot easier for you. I think that's what we forget. By understanding the other person, it will make it easier for you because you'll know what messaging that they would appreciate. You'll know things that actually might be out of their comfort zone and they need more support in. And that will build up that trust. I'm trying to think, I've got a couple of examples for this. I'm trying to think which will be the best one to give you. Actually, I think I'm not sure if I shared this one with you before. I did a change project a little bit ago. Let's say maybe about a year and a half ago. And there was a big change coming, lots of restructuring, lots of new systems. There was just, let me say, too much change at once. But I was in there to support this change. And there was so much resistance. And it's the first time these systems have been changed for a while. And I just thought, right, this is going ridiculous. I was hearing resistance everywhere. And I sat down and just did a few interviews. I did a focus group. And I spoke to people and said, look, what's going on? And literally was really honest and said, what's going on? Because you're making my life hell right now. But in a really joking way, like, you're making my job really hard here. How can I help you to help me? And they just went, and they told me and they spoke. And actually, I think I have said this to you before, the thing they were scared of was something that wasn't changing. It was the hours they were working. They were saying, actually, we want to keep to these hours. I'm like, oh, so straight away, because I then understood what their fears were, I could straight away go, right, I've got it. Well, that's not changing. And then I put communications out to tell everyone else. And let's say about 60% of the resistance just fell away. And I was like, oh, thank you. Yeah. I'm enjoying my job again.
Yeah, absolutely. So for anybody who's in the call, if you've got any questions or comments you want to kind of chuck in our direction, feel free to drop those in the comments now for us and we'll answer those questions for you. If we just do a little bit of a summary, I guess, of kind of the key things to really help ease the pain of change. So first of all, we kind of talked about that organizational context. So are we trying to drive too much change across the organization? You know, have honest conversations at that level to understand what is going on there. From there, relationships and trust. And that's at the organizational level, and it's also at that leadership team level, and what that means in terms of kind of the likelihood of change going well based on where relationships are. We've then got listening. So using that listening to understand, to consider what's actually happening, that communication, you know, ask those questions, understand where there might be challenges, where might the resistance be, you know, how do you get in there up front ahead of time if you can, or if you're hitting the resistance, get into the conversation. Try not to think that it's about the individual, but actually look at it and go, what am I missing here? And ask those open, honest questions around what's causing the challenge, what's causing the issue. So those would be some key things that kind of I'm capturing. Is there anything you want to add to that, Zoe?
I think the communication piece is key, definitely. I think there's something else worth talking about when we talk about easing the pain. If you are the person in the organisation tasked with leading through change, leading a change project, or, you know, you've been put in that position, whether you are trained as a change manager or not, sometimes it can really feel like all the resistance is coming straight at you, and all the audible unhappiness is aimed at you. And I think it's really important to talk about well-being and talk about actually how we look after ourselves as well. And remembering actually, it may feel like it's at me and I'm doing the change because I'm the face of change, that I'm the one they speak to, but it's not you. It's actually at an organizational level. So I think that's really important, because I have so many people come to me really stressed because they're just overwhelmed by the amount of resistance they're getting. And a lot of that comes from the perspective they're seeing it from. They've got so much on their shoulders, so to speak. They're feeling like they're weighed down by all this expectation. And it's like, no, it's not you, which is why I always talk about that organizational alignment and how we actually work with our leaders as well, and the support comes from them. So yeah, I think definitely that well-being piece as well, isn't it? And there are so many different types of change, but it all comes down to those things you spoke about, you know, trust, relationships, communication, listening, really getting to know your people so you can figure out what they need, because it's about people and their emotions.
Yeah, definitely. We've had a great question in from Delia. So hi, Delia. Thank you for tuning in. So 2 great questions, actually. Any tips for building trust during change? And any tips on teamwork during change projects? Great questions. Thank you for those.
Yeah. So can I take the trust one first?
Go for it.
You can see I'm dying to answer this one. For me, building trust during change is all about being transparent. Because quite often you'll notice when people are leading through change, there's a lot of good stuff going on, like lots of benefits. And we always talk about communicating the benefits and saying, all this amazing stuff's going to happen and this is when you expect to see it. But of course, the people receiving these messages aren't in the same place. They can't see the bigger picture, and they're probably in a world of pain. So actually, don't ignore the elephant in the room. Tell them and say, listen, I get it. I know this is going on at the minute, and sort of tell them what the pain points they're experiencing. Apologies, by the way, if you can hear that. That is a lawnmower outside my window. Amazing when we realise.
What was going on? Like, is it an air siren or something like that?
Oh my goodness, sorry everyone. It just was like, go away. Actually, it sounds more like a strimmer. Sorry, Delia. I was halfway through answering your question. I thought I should mention that. So yeah, don't ignore the elephant. Say to them, look, I realise these are the pains that you're going through. And if you don't know what they are, ask them. Have a conversation, say where, and then figure out what you can do to counteract that for them. Because it might be you say all these benefits are coming later on, but actually let me see what benefit I can find for you right now, because I know what pain you are describing to me, because it's that listening to understand, and what can I give you that's going to help that right now. So I think that builds up a lot of trust because you're being honest. Because remember, it's human being to human being. And that's you showing your vulnerability, your humility, and it's that leadership quality within you. So I think that's definitely what I would do with trust.
I think you're right. That transparency thing, I think, is is a top tip for that trust building. And I think, again, that listening piece that we talked about. Should I take this next one then? So the teamwork during change projects. I would say make sure you make it feel like a team. That would be the first thing. Sometimes, like, we bring these kind of project groups together from these different parts of the business sometimes, or not, but we don't actually then help bring that team together. Some people might never have worked together before. They might not know each other's style. They might not understand what else they've got going on in their lives. So actually, when you are kind of leading big pieces of project work, take some time to build those relationships across that team. Take that time to help them understand their roles and responsibilities within that project activity, so that that communication is much easier. And you see this too often, where a group of people are brought together to deliver on something actually strategically really important, and the kickoff meeting goes straight into the stuff that needs to happen. Actually, spending enough time up front on building the relationships, that's also where you start to hear things like where their resistance is, or worries or change or anything like that. Taking the time to do that will pay off. So that would be my tip. Anything you want to add to that?
I think with that as well, knowing where their resistance is, but on the flip side of that, knowing where their strengths are, because maybe they've done some of this before. Unless you ask them, they may not tell you. Delia, there's a really good model by someone called Tuckman. So Tuckman's model of team development, which talks about how a team is developed. And there's this phase called storming, and it's where the team gets together, they're all very nice, everything's fine, and then they have a little bit of we'll say argy-bargy, like elbows, when the people try to get through elbows like that, but they don't get on so well. They have a storming phase, and that's where people can get really, really scared as a leader, thinking, oh my goodness, I'm not doing my job. But it's completely normal. But yeah, Tuckman's model of team development might be an interesting one for you to have a look at, about how we develop teams. I think, Anne, what you were saying about teams as well, it's important at the end of it to make sure you finish that team, you have a closure for that team as well, because they come off on a high and then it just finishes. So it's making sure you would finish that team in a nice way.
And that has to be a celebration, whether it's gone exactly to plan or not. There is learning to be had in there, and celebrating the effort that's gone in, even if it's not been fully successful. Like, it is important to make sure that people then want to come back into that situation and that environment at another time, because they know actually they'll be learning and valuing what's going on, even if it's not perfect. So yeah, I think that's a really great shout. Okay, so we haven't got any other questions in there, but thank you for that question, those questions, Delia. That's really, really kind of you to do that. So we are going to wrap up now. So that is the last of our 4 sessions. We'll make sure all the links are in the comments for this, for the other ones, and we'll probably drop in that Tuckman's one as well, just as an extra resource for you to have a look at. Feel free to get in touch with Zoe or I in LinkedIn directly if you've got any questions you want to follow up on. But if you think this was a useful session, feel free to share it with your colleagues and other people in your network too. So thank you so much.